Dura Mitchell, a 28-year-old staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, was finally returning home after 8 years of service and missing 7 Christmases with her family. She'd counted the days, packed her bags, and even bought presents. Then a text from her father buzzed her phone. "Don't bother coming home." Her heart sank, but her only reply was fine. 7 days later, she woke to 20 missed calls from her family and 1 from their lawyer. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you're new here. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Growing up in Camden, Maine, that charming white 2-story house with the bright red door, life looked like a postcard. We had a perfect view of the harbor, sailboats bobbing as if they hadn't a care in the world. To anyone peeking in, the Mitchells were the all-American dream. Shiny, happy, untouchable. My dad, Martin, was a larger-than-life figure, the kind of man folks tipped their hats to, even if they whispered about him later. He'd built his construction company from nothing, ruling it like he was holding court with that ever-present clipboard of his. My mom, Lorraine, was the glue. She gave up her teaching career to keep his business humming and raised 3 kids. Ethan, my older brother, was the golden boy, practically born with a hard hat on, ready to take over Dad's empire. Haley, my baby sister, was the brainy one, already dreaming of med school before high school. And me, I was Dira, the middle kid, the one who never quite fit the mold, the wild card, the one they called a disappointment behind closed doors. Dira, why can't you just stick to the plan, like Ethan? Dad would sigh, his voice heavy with a mix of frustration and expectation. The plan was crystal clear. Stay in line, join the family business, marry some respectable guy, and keep your mouth shut. But I couldn't stop asking questions. Why this? Why that? Why can't I choose my own path? I found my answer in high school when I joined ROTC. It was like someone flipped a switch. The discipline, the structure, the sense of purpose, it felt like home in a way that Red Doored House never did. The day I broke the news to my family that I was enlisting instead of heading to the business school Dad had already paid for, it was like I'd dropped a bomb. I can still see his face, red as a lobster, his fists clenched so tight I thought he'd break something. "No daughter of mine is going to be some soldier puppet getting shot at in the desert," he roared. My hands were shaking, but I stood my ground. "I've made my decision," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked at me like I'd vanished right there in front of him. "Then you're no longer welcome here," he said, and that was that. That door slammed shut on my old life. I left with 1 duffel bag and a quiet blessing from my grandmother, Vivian. She was the only one who ever stood up to Dad, her eyes twinkling with that fierce kind of love. "This world needs fewer Martin Mitchells and more Duras," she told me, and I clung to those words like a lifeline. They got me through boot camp, through those freezing mornings when my breath hung in the air, through nights in Afghanistan when I wasn't sure I'd see the sunrise. I earned medals, promotions, and the kind of respect that didn't care about my last name. When I got the Silver Star, I sent newspaper clippings home, hoping maybe they'd see me for who I was becoming. Mom called, her voice breaking through tears. Haley sent a sweet postcard that made me smile. Ethan, a quick congrats text. But from Dad, nothing. Just silence stretching on for 8 long years. Then came that one message. "Don't bother coming home." It hit like a punch, but I didn't fire back with anger. Just a single word, fine. By then, I'd learned some wounds don't heal, and some people don't change. Still, I packed my bags, not for Camden, but for a little cabin by Crystal Lake. You know the kind. Creaky floorboards, Wi-Fi that drops every 5 minutes. It was a place to breathe, to grieve, to figure out who you are when your family decides you're not theirs anymore. I thought I was heading there for peace, maybe some kind of closure. But what I found instead was a tangled web of lies. Turns out my father hadn't just erased me from the family. He was using me, banking on the fact I'd never find out. And let me tell you, That moment when the truth hit, it changed everything. That little cabin by Crystal Lake, it was tiny, creaky, and smelled like pine and forgotten summers. The heater groaned like it was personally offended by the cold, and the shower. Let's just say it had the water pressure of a tired garden hose. But you know what? It was mine. After years of bunkers, tents, and military housing that felt like it belonged to someone else. That rundown cabin was enough. It was a place to just be. Have you ever found a spot like that, somewhere that feels like it's holding you together when everything else is falling apart? The next morning, I drove into Camden to grab some groceries. The town hadn't changed. A lick. Same cozy bookstore on the corner, same diner by the docks where fishermen still argued over coffee. But something felt off, like the air itself was holding its breath. Maybe it was me, carrying 8 years of baggage. Or maybe it was the way folks stared. Their eyes lingering a little too long, like they were seeing a ghost. Did they think I'd never come back, or were they hoping I wouldn't? I was standing in the grocery store, debating between Frosted Flakes and something vaguely healthy, when a voice snapped me out of it. Dira Mitchell. I spun around, nearly dropping the cereal box, and there she was, Tara Green, my high school best friend. Her hair was shorter, her face softer with time, but that smile, it was like no years had passed. We hugged right there, in aisle 5 next to the frozen peas, and for a second, I swear it felt like home. Have you ever run into someone who makes you feel like you're 16 again? Just for a moment. When did you get back? She asked, her eyes bright. Are you here for good? Why didn't you tell anyone? I mumbled something about it being a last-minute trip, but Tara's always been too sharp for that. She gave me that look, you know, the one that says she's already piecing it all together. Your parents must be thrilled, she said. I saw your mom at the pharmacy last week, and she didn't say a word. I shrugged, my throat tightening. It's complicated. Her smile faded just a bit. You're not staying with them, are you? I said. I'm at a cabin by Crystal Lake. She nodded, slow, like she was fitting puzzle pieces in her head. We ended up at the old cafe where we used to cram for exams, sipping coffee that tasted like nostalgia. I gave her the short version, the fight with Dad. 8 years of silence, that final text that slammed the door shut for good. She listened, quiet, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Then she said, I'm not surprised. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? She glanced around like she was checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in. Your dad's changed, Dira. People used to look up to him. Now they're scared of him. My parents worked with Mitchell Construction until he canceled their contract out of nowhere, no warning, no reason. My stomach twisted. Why? I asked, but she just shook her head. No one knows. But there's talk about the company, government projects, people getting blacklisted if they speak up. Then she dropped the bomb. He tells everyone you refuse to come home, that you cut them off. I sat there, stunned, as the past 8 years rewrote themselves in my head. While I was out serving my country, my father was painting me as the villain. Can you imagine finding out your own family has been spinning lies about you for years? The next morning, I was jolted awake by a knock at the cabin door. My hand reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Old habits die hard, don't they? I peeked through the curtain and saw her, Vivian, my grandmother, standing on the porch in a thick wool coat, her face fierce as ever. I opened the door, and before I could say a word, she hit me with, were you going to tell me you were back, or just hide out here like some fugitive? Her voice was sharp, but her hug, it was soft, warm, smelling like peppermint and old books. I swear that hug could fix just about anything. She plopped down by the window, eyeing the cabin. Not exactly the Mitchell mansion, but it's cozy, she said with a smirk. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. Dad made it clear I wasn't welcome, I told her. She snorted. Martin's ego's always been louder than his conscience. But this time, Dira, it's more than ego. I turned to her, my heart Picking up speed? What do you mean? She looked tired, like she'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. The business is in trouble. Ethan's made bad investments. Haley dropped out of her PhD without telling anyone, and your mother. She barely leaves the house. I sat there silent while her words sank in, tightening the knots in my chest. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. 'Cause, she said, her eyes locked on mine. Despite everything, you're still family, and you deserve to know what you're walking into. After she left, I sat alone in that creaky cabin, her words echoing like a storm rolling in. The perfect Mitchell family was crumbling, and I hadn't even begun to uncover the half of it. What would you do, finding out? Your whole world's been built on secrets. By the third morning, I needed to clear my head, so I laced up my sneakers and hit the pine trails behind the cabin. The air was crisp, slicing through my lungs in that way that makes you feel alive, really alive. For a fleeting moment, I let it all go. No officers barking orders, no radios crackling, no weight of a rifle on my shoulder. Just me, the frost crunching underfoot, the trees standing tall and silent. It was the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a promise. Have you ever found a moment like that, where the world just stops? But as I rounded the last bend near the gravel road, that promise shattered. There it was, a black SUV parked just off the trail facing my cabin. Engine off, windows tinted so dark they swallowed the light. Could have been a coincidence, right? But my gut, honed by years of instincts that kept me alive, screamed otherwise. I kept jogging, my pace steady, like I hadn't noticed a thing. But every nerve in my body was on high alert. Who was watching me? Was it him? My father. Why would he bother tailing me now after all these years, unless he had something to hide? Something big. Later that day, a guy from the rental agency showed up to fix a leaky faucet. Logan Reed, he said, introducing himself with a handshake that was firm but not showy. Tall, calm, with the tool belt slung low like he actually knew how to use it. As he worked, I caught him glancing at the military duffel bag I'd left by the door. Army? He asked, casual but curious. 8 years, I said, keeping it light. It's just home for the holidays. He nodded, slow, like he was weighing my words. My brother was Marines, he said. Always said coming home was the hardest part. I smiled, polite, but something in his tone made me pause. Was he just making conversation, or was there more? As he packed up, he hesitated, like he was deciding whether to cross a line. You're Martin Mitchell's daughter, right? He asked. The air shifted the way it always did when Dad's name came up. Yeah, I said. Careful, must be interesting coming. Back to all this, he said, his eyes searching mine. All what? I pressed. He shrugged, but it wasn't casual. It's just town talk. About the company, the contracts, the way your dad's been operating lately. Some say he's changed. Others say he's desperate. That word, desperate, hung in the air like smoke. Martin Mitchell, desperate. The man who ruled Camden like a king. What could push someone that proud to the edge? The next few days, everything felt wrong. Everywhere I went, eyes followed, smiles came too fast, then vanished when I looked too long. Was it just me? Or was the whole town holding its breath, guarding some secret I wasn't supposed to uncover? And that black SUV, it kept showing up. Once at the gas station, idling across the lot, again outside the post office, just far enough to seem random, but never far enough to fade from my mind. I started checking my mirrors, locking the cabin door twice at night. My instincts were screaming something's not right. Have you ever felt that? That prickling sense that the world's about to tilt. On the fourth night, I found myself at the Anchor, that dive bar Ethan and I used to sneak into as teenagers, chasing a thrill we didn't understand. I don't know what I was looking for, maybe a glimpse of my brother, maybe just a tether to the life I'd left behind. And there he was, hunched over the bar, nursing a glass of something amber and strong. He looked worn, Older than his years, like life had been tugging at his edges and he'd stopped fighting back. I slid onto the stool beside him, no invitation needed. "Buy you a drink, stranger," I said, half teasing. He turned, and for a split second his eyes lit up like the Ethan I used to know. Then they dulled, weighed down by something heavy. "Look, what the war dragged in," he muttered, a half smile laced with regret. We drank in silence, the kind that's louder than words. 3 rounds in, his guard started to crack. "You were smart to leave," he said, staring into his glass. "Should have gone with you." I studied him, my heart picking up speed. "What's going on, Ethan?" He laughed, but it was hollow, like it hurt to let it out. "The business is a mess. Deals. We can't deliver money we don't have. It's contracts we never should have won." I leaned in, my voice low. "What kind of contracts?" He hesitated, like he'd said too much. "Government? Military? Things above my clearance level." My pulse thudded in my ears. Military contracts, clearance. Why would a small-town construction company be tangled up in that? Then he dropped it. The words that turned my world inside out. "Dad said it was handled. He always finds a way. Said we had backing. Someone with the right credentials." Credentials? Clearance? Military? The pieces slammed together and my blood ran cold. Was it me? Was he using me? My name, my service, my silver star. Had he twisted it all to win contracts he had no business touching? How far had he gone? What had he done in my name while I was out there risking my life? I sat there, the bar fading around me, my brother's words burning through my chest. The father who'd erased me, who'd told the town I'd abandoned him, had been building his empire. On lies. Lies that might have started with me. Now I was back, and that black SUV was circling closer. Whatever he was hiding, it was big. Big enough to watch me. Big enough to scare a whole town. Big enough to tear apart what was left of our family. What do you do when the man who raised you might be the one you need to bring down? On the 5th morning, I woke up with that restless itch, the kind that makes your skin feel too tight. That black SUV was back, parked closer now, right at the edge of the woods behind the cabin. Stark windows caught the snowy pines like a mirror, but I knew someone was inside, watching, waiting. Why now? Why so bold? Were they trying to scare me into silence or push me to do something reckless? My heart pounded, but I wasn't about to let them see me sweat. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside into air so sharp it stung, and walked slow, deliberate, my boots crunching loud enough to say, "I see you, and I'm not afraid," even if my pulse was screaming otherwise. Have you ever stared down something? Or someone knowing they wanted you to blink first? After a few minutes, the SUV pulled away, quiet, controlled, not speeding off like they were caught. No. This was a message: we're here anytime we want. I went back inside, my hands shaking as I locked the door and reached for the folder Vivian had left. Each page was heavier than the last. Fake authorizations, security access, emails I never sent. Dates that pinned me to military bases across the globe while my name was used to unlock restricted bid platforms. It all pointed to one thing: deliberate fraud with me as the perfect cover. Why didn't they think I'd come back? Why did they assume I'd stay quiet? Don't people always underestimate the ones they cast aside? I grabbed my phone, opened the Notes app, and started typing every detail. Every moment from the day I left for boot camp to now. This wasn't just about the documents. It was my story, my truth, a shield against the lies they'd built around me. If you're reading this, if any of this hits home, drop a comment below. Have you ever felt used by the people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever had to choose between your peace and their approval? Because let me tell you, you're not alone in that fight. The next morning, I needed to move, to think. So, I drove into town and ended up at Coastal Coffee ordering a black Americano. I tucked myself by the back window where a sliver of sunlight warmed my fingers and opened my notebook. I wasn't sketching plans. I was mapping motives. Who gained from my silence? Who lost if I spoke? I was halfway through linking a clearance application to a sudden spike in contract volume when the bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know it was Haley, my little sister, who I hadn't seen since that hospital room years ago. She looked like a ghost of herself, thinner, her coat hanging loose, her eyes tired but sharp. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for too long. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded, and we sat there. The silence between us so thick it felt like it could choke me. "I read your message," she finally said. "It's the one you left Mom about the documents. I know what he did, Dira, and I'm sorry." I looked at her, not angry, just bone-tired. "Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't anyone say anything?" "You knew I wasn't." "Part of this, you knew it wasn't right." She looked away, her jaw tight. "Because we were afraid. Of him. Of the truth. It was easier to believe he was saving us than to admit he was burying us." "He almost buried me," I said, my voice low but steady. "If I hadn't come back, if I hadn't found out, I'd be the one taking the fall." Her eyes glistened. Tears. She didn't let fall. "I know," she whispered, "and it's killing me." I didn't tell her I'd already sent everything to Major Cooper. That the investigation was growing, that subpoenas were on the way. I wanted her to choose truth on her own, and she did. She reached into her bag, pulled out a flash drive, and slid it across the table. Internal messages from the company. You'll want to see them. Some mention your name, some reference clearance protocols. It's not explicit, but it's all there. I took the drive. It's weight heavier than it had any right to be. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. She stood to leave, then paused. "You were always the brave one, Dira. We just didn't know how brave until now." And then she was gone, leaving me with a storm brewing in my chest. That night, I plugged the drive into my laptop, and what I found was worse than I'd imagined. Emails between Dad and company leads. Phrases like backdoor access. Our military source leveraged the sergeant's name without formal request. Screenshots of memos calling me the shield. A human shield. Not for bullets, but for their liability. I forwarded every file to Major Cooper, made copies, printed them, labeled them, filed them in triplicate. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about tearing down the lies brick by brick. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. 2 words, "We need to talk." I met him at the Marina Neutral Ground. Open water, plenty of witnesses. He looked worse than Haley. Red-rimmed eyes, hands twitching like he hadn't slept in days. "I heard what you're doing," he said, his voice rough. "You're going to ruin everything." I didn't flinch. "No, Ethan, Dad did that." He shook his head, desperate. "You don't get it. We've worked our whole lives for this. It's a company, the legacy. He made mistakes, but he did it for us. He committed fraud." I snapped. "He used me, put me at risk. Could have gone to prison if I hadn't come back. Do you get that?" He didn't answer, just sank onto a bench, elbows on his knees, like the weight of it all was crushing him. "I thought he had a plan," he mumbled. "I thought it would work out." "It never works out when it's built on lies," I said, my voice cutting through the cold air. He looked up, his eyes pleading. "Do you want him to die in disgrace? Is this about revenge?" I stared at him, my heart pounding but clear. "No, Ethan. It's about truth, about survival, about making sure no one ever does this to me or anyone." Again, he didn't reply, and I didn't stay. Back at the cabin, I found an envelope taped to the door. No return address, just one word scrolled in sharp letters. ENOUGH. Inside a single sheet of paper, a formal letter claiming I, Staff Sergeant Dira Mitchell, had authorized a full transfer of my security clearance to Mitchell Construction. Construction. Except the signature was mine, and it wasn't. The date said I'd signed it in Kabul on a day I was in surgery. Shrapnel wounds burning through my body. It was the smoking gun, the final piece that could bury him. I snapped a photo, sent it to Cooper, and tossed the original into the fireplace, watching it curl into ash. Some truths don't need to be kept, just witnessed then destroyed. If you've ever been used, if someone who claimed to love you stole your name, your story, your power, tell me in the comments, how did you take it back? Because this is me taking mine, and I'm not stopping until every lie is burned to the ground. What would you do, standing at the edge of a truth this big, knowing it could bring down everything you once called home? 3 days after I handed Major Cooper that forged clearance letter, the investigation kicked into overdrive. It wasn't just about my father anymore. It was the whole Mitchell construction operation unraveling like a cheap sweater. The feds called it systemic misappropriation of federal military identity. Me, I called it betrayal, layered so deep it felt like a knife twisting with every new revelation. This wasn't just business. It was personal, calculated, and carved into my life like a scar. Have you ever uncovered a truth so ugly it made you question everything you thought you knew about your own family? I didn't want to go public, God, I didn't. Wanted to keep this fight quiet, handle it in the shadows where it started. But then a journalist from the New York Times found my anonymous post on a veterans Reddit thread, traced it to my LinkedIn profile, and suddenly my story wasn't mine anymore. It was slipping through my fingers, ready to spill into the world whether I liked it or not. He asked for an interview. Said no, my stomach in knots at the thought of my name in headlines. Then he sent me a screenshot, a post from someone claiming to be a family member of the whistleblower, called me unstable, dishonorable, ungrateful. The words were sharp, polished, and unmistakable. It was my Aunt Carol, Dad's oldest sister, the family's PR warrior. Always ready to spin a lie when the truth got too messy. That's when I knew I had to say yes. Have you ever been backed into a corner, forced to speak your truth before you were ready, just to set the record straight? The article dropped on a Wednesday, front page of the digital edition. My face in uniform staring back at me under a bold headline. Sergeant speaks. How one woman exposed a military contracting scam led by her own family. By noon, my inbox was a war zone. Hate messages accusing me of betraying my blood mixed with letters from strangers who'd been silenced. Betrayed, gaslit into believing family meant loyalty at any cost. I read every single one, every name, every story, because those voices reminded me I wasn't just fighting my father. I was fighting a system. A lie that said, you owe your family everything, even when they steal your soul. Those messages, they were my armor, my proof I wasn't alone. Have you ever found strength in a stranger's story when the people closest to you turned away? Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. National news, military blogs, veteran forums buzzing with threads. And a hashtag #Stand with Steve Mitchell, trending like wildfire. People I'd never met were in my corner, calling out the abuse of trust, demanding accountability. It felt like a tidal wave, lifting me up but threatening to pull me under. Not all the attention was kind, though. A package showed up at the cabin. No return address, just a framed photo from my commissioning ceremony, me and Dad side by side. The glass was shattered. An X scrolled over my face in red Sharpie. I didn't cry. Not this time. I buried it behind the woodpile and kept moving. But the real pain, it wasn't the threats, it was the silence. Mom hadn't reached out since the article hit. Haley, who'd sworn she was with me, went radio silent. My texts unanswered. Even Grandma's side of the family, who always preached truth, stayed quiet. I guess it was too messy for their Thanksgiving table. Have you ever poured out your heart, told your truth, and watched the people you love choose the lie because it's easier to swallow? Major Cooper said the agency would handle it from here, but I couldn't. Just walk away. I asked to testify before the Senate Oversight Committee. That's rare for active military, he said, but I'll see what I can do. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to D.C., my nerves buzzing like a live wire. The night before my testimony, I holed up in a dingy hotel room with peeling wallpaper and a view of a brick wall. I thought about quitting, about letting it all go, disappearing into a quiet life where no one knew my name. Then I checked my inbox. One new message from a woman named Kendra. My husband died in a faulty barracks built by a contractor. Your father's company won the bid for, she wrote. Thank you for speaking out. You're saving people like me from another folded flag. I broke down crying for her, for me, for all the things I couldn't fix but could finally face. That email, it was my why, my reason to keep going. Have you ever gotten a message that changed everything, that made you realize your fight was bigger than you? The next morning, I put on my uniform, walked into that Senate hearing room, and faced the camera lights, the notebooks, the senators who looked at me like I was both hero and headache. I told them everything, how I enlisted out of duty, served, out of honor, and how my own family twisted that honor into a mask for greed. I handed over the forged signature, the memos, Haley's flash drive, emails, every shred of evidence I had. I ended with words that burned as I said them. I was trained to protect this country from enemies, foreign and domestic. I just never thought the domestic part would wear my last name. When I sat down, the room was silent. Then one person clapped. It spread, soft at first, then louder, like a heartbeat. I didn't need the applause, but it told me I'd been heard. After the hearing, 2 senators approached me. One asked if I'd consider consulting on fraud prevention for veteran services. The other asked how I was holding up. Honestly, I said like a bridge that finally collapsed under its own weight. But at least now you can see the river underneath. One nodded with pity, the other with pride. I didn't need either. I just needed to know I'd done what was right. Have you ever stood at a moment like that where you know you've changed the course of your life, even if it cost you everything? I flew back to North Carolina the next morning. No family waiting at the gate, just the same cold breeze that greeted me when I enlisted. I stepped outside the terminal, let the air fill my lungs, and felt something shift. Not closure, not yet, but clarity, like the fog was finally lifting. I drove to the storage unit I'd been renting since coming stateside, packed with boxes of old memories. Mom's casserole dish, photos of me and Haley's kids, letters from Basic, and a box of Dad's old military awards still wrapped in newsprint. I stared at that box, then grabbed a Sharpie and wrote one word across the top: truth. Because that's what this was about. Not revenge, not justice, just the raw, unshakable truth. I walked away without taking anything, not because those memories didn't matter, but because I did. On the drive home, I passed a church sign. The truth will set you free, but first it will shatter everything. I laughed because, yeah, it had. But that freedom, that peace, that strength to keep going, that was mine now. If you've ever stood alone, spoken your truth, okay, and watched your world fall apart before it got better, you're not as alone as you think. I see you, and I'm with you. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're at in your story. Where are you watching from? And don't forget to subscribe, because what's next might just be the healing we've all been waiting for. The weeks after DC were a blur, but the fight wasn't over. It was just changing shape. Major Cooper called to say the investigation had expanded, now pulling in subcontractors and even a few low-level Pentagon officials who'd looked the other way. Arrests were coming, he said, and my father's name was at the top of the list. Should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was hollow, like I'd been running on fumes and finally hit empty. I stayed at the cabin, avoiding town, where whispers followed me like shadows. People didn't know whether to thank me or shun me, and I wasn't sure I cared either way. You ever won a battle but felt like you lost something bigger? Then one evening, as the sun dipped low over Crystal Lake, painting the water gold, There was a knock at the door. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Old habits die hard. I peeked through the curtain, half, expecting another threat, another envelope, another piece of my past weaponized against me. But it was Haley, standing on the porch, her hands stuffed in her coat pockets, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. My heart twisted, relief, anger, love, all tangled up. I opened the door and she didn't wait for an invitation. Just stepped inside and hugged me tight, like she was afraid I'd vanish if she let go. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have been there." I was scared, but that's no excuse. We sat by the fire, the cabin creaking around us. And she told me everything. How Dad's control had tightened after I left. How he'd pushed her to be perfect until she broke. How she'd stayed silent because she thought it would protect Mom. But it didn't, she said, tears streaming. "It just hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." I didn't have words, not yet, so I just held her hand, the way we used to when we were kids, when the world was simpler. Have you ever had to forgive someone you love? Not because they deserved it, but because you needed to let go of the pain. Haley stayed the night, and we talked until dawn about her dreams of teaching kindergarten, about my years overseas, about the family we'd lost and the one we might still build. She promised to testify if it came to that, to stand with me no matter what. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, like maybe we could find our way back to each other. But hope is fragile, and the next morning brought a new blow. An email from Major Cooper. The feds had raided Mitchell Construction, and Dad had fled, leaving behind a trail of shredded documents and a company in chaos. Ethan was cooperating, turning over what was left. But Mom had checked into a hospital, overwhelmed by the collapse of her world. I wanted to run to her to fix it, but Haley stopped me. "She has to face this herself," she said. "We all do." I stood at the edge of Crystal Lake that afternoon, the water still and cold, and thought about Mom, about Dad, about the family I'd fought for and the one I'd had to fight against. I didn't know where he was or if he'd ever face me again, but I knew one thing: I wasn't running anymore. I'd built a life out of truth, and no one could take that from me. If you've ever had to let go of someone you love to save yourself, how did you find the strength to keep going? Drop a comment, share your story. I'm listening. Stay with me, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something new, something true, something worth fighting for. Months slipped by, and the world moved on. The headlines faded. The news cycle churned. But the scars, they stayed quiet but deep, like lines carved into stone. 3 months after the Senate hearing, I chose to leave the Army, honorably discharged, my decision, not theirs. I wasn't running. I was redirecting. My mission had shifted from battlefields abroad to a fight closer to home. Truth. Healing and helping others find their way through the mess I'd survived. Have you ever felt your purpose change? Like the ground beneath you shifted and you had to learn to walk all over again. I started working with a nonprofit, one that fights for veterans, helping them navigate benefits. Exposing fraud in the systems meant to protect us. It's not glamorous work, not the kind that gets you medals or headlines. But it's honest, and every time I help someone get what they're owed, it feels like I'm taking back a piece of what was stolen from me. It matters. It's enough. And isn't that what we're all searching for is something that feels real, that makes a difference? One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a local high school in North Carolina. A group of seniors, wide-eyed and curious about public service, sat cross-legged. In the auditorium, I shared my story, at least the parts I could fit into a 30-minute talk: the enlistment, the betrayal, the fight to expose the truth. I left out the darkest bits, the ones that still wake me up at night. When I finished, a girl, maybe 17, raised her hand. Her voice was soft but steady, and her eyes held a spark I recognized. "How did you keep going?" she asked. "When it felt like everyone you loved turned their back on you?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because Her voice sounded like mine 8 years ago, standing at the edge of a choice that would change everything. "You keep going," I told her, "because if you stop, they win. And because someday someone else will need your story the way you needed someone else's to keep you moving forward." She smiled, a small, hopeful thing, and in that moment, I knew. This was why I'd survived. Not to be a hero, not to burn bridges, but to light one a path for others to cross when their world feels too heavy. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your pain had a purpose, that it could help someone else find their way? Last month, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address, just 3 lines in Haley's familiar scroll. "I'm sorry." "Oh, it scared?" "You were right." I held it, my fingers tracing the words, and felt a weight lift. Not all of it, but enough. I didn't know if I'd hear from her again, if we'd ever sit across from each other and rebuild what we'd lost, but those words, they were a start, a crack in the wall between us. I didn't write back, not yet. Forgiveness, like healing, isn't a race or a performance. It's a process. One I'm still learning to navigate. Have you ever gotten an apology that felt like a step toward mending, even if it didn't fix everything? If you've made it this far, if you've walked with me through the pain, the silence, the fight, and the truth, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying, for listening, for seeing me. This channel, this story, this Space It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice, about building a place where you can reclaim yours. If you've ever been betrayed by family, if you've had to choose between truth and the comfort of tradition, know this: you're not alone. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for, and your story matters. So drop a comment below. Tell me how your story is unfolding, what truths you're fighting for, or just where you're watching from. Like this video if it gave you something to hold on to, something to think about. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Because here at Hidden Family Revenge Stories, we're not just telling the stories they tried to bury. We're shouting them loud and unapologetic for everyone who's ever had to fight to be heard. This is my story, but maybe it's yours too. And what's coming next? It's not just healing. It's a revolution of truth, and we're building it together. See you in the next one. 6 months after Haley's message, I still hadn't replied. It wasn't for lack of thinking about it. Her words haunted me, sneaking into my thoughts in the shower, on long drives, even in the grocery store lines staring at a box of cereal we used to fight over as kids. That message lived in the back of my mind like a door I wasn't ready to open, one I wasn't sure I ever could. I told myself I needed time, but let's be real, I was scared. Scared that answering would drag me back into the pain, the silence, or worse, some half-hearted apology dripping with guilt that would hurt more than the betrayal itself. Then one chilly morning, I opened my mailbox and found a thick envelope. No return address, but the handwriting stopped me cold. It was Haley's loopy, deliberate letters I'd know anywhere. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it, standing there with my keys in one hand, the mail in the other, like the world was holding its breath. Inside was a simple blue card. No glitter, no flowers, just 3 words embossed in silver. You are invited. I sank onto my couch and read the letter 3 times before it felt real. Haley was getting married. It's a vineyard in Virginia, 2 months from now. Small and private, she wrote. We're keeping it simple. I'd like to talk. Miss you. No mention of dad or mom, just her reaching out across the years and the hurt. I stared at the RSVP card, the boxes glaring back at me. Accept, decline. No, maybe. No, I need to think about this because my heart's still broken. God, I wish there was a maybe box, a way to pause the moment and figure out what I felt. For the rest of the week, I was a mess. Couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. Everywhere I went, I saw her. A girl at the bookstore with Haley's laugh. A street performer strumming the song we used to belt out as kids. A woman in uniform holding her sister's hand, looking at her like she was the whole world. It was like the universe was nudging me, saying, "You can't ignore this forever." My therapist, who's heard every jagged piece of my story, put it like this: closure isn't a door that slams shut, Dira. It's a window you learn to live beside. Some days it's open, letting in a breeze. Some days it's locked tight. But it's always there, part of the house you're building. Maybe this wedding, this invite, was my window cracking open, just enough to let a little light in. I didn't send the RSVP, not yet, but I did something that surprised even me. I bought a dress, navy blue, simple, the kind that makes you feel strong without trying too hard. And that was a start. The next few weeks were a tug of war between hope and fear. I kept working with a nonprofit, helping veterans fight for their benefits, exposing the cracks in a system that's supposed to protect them. It grounded me, gave me purpose, but it couldn't drown out the questions swirling in my head. Mom be at the wedding? Would she look at me with that same quiet guilt? Would Dad show up uninvited, ready to rewrite history again? And Haley, what did she want to talk about? Was she really ready to face the past? Or was this just a way to ease her own conscience? I didn't have answers, but I started to realize something. Going to that wedding wasn't about them. It was about me. About choosing whether I wanted to keep that window open or board it up for good. One evening, I sat by Crystal Lake, the water still and silver under the moon, and pulled out Haley's letter again. I traced those words, "I miss you," and let myself feel it all. The anger, the love, the ache of missing her too. I thought about the girl who raised her hand at that high school asking how I kept going. I told her it was about not letting them win, about lighting a path for someone else. Maybe now I needed to light that path for myself, to show up not for the family I'd lost, but for the woman I'd become. I still hadn't checked a box on that RSVP card, but I booked a flight to Virginia. I packed that navy dress, folded Haley's, let her into my bag, and told myself I'd decide when I got there. This wasn't about fixing everything or pretending the scars weren't there. It was about showing up, about facing the window and choosing whether to let the breeze in. And you out there watching the story unfold, have you ever stood at a crossroads like this, where one choice could change everything? Drop a comment below. Tell me about your own windows, your own invitations, your own moments of choosing yourself. I landed in Virginia 2 days before the wedding, stepping into a small town cradled by rolling hills and whispering trees, the kind of place where time seems to pause, letting memories scream louder than you'd like. The vineyard was straight out of a dream, golden rows of grapes stretching into the distance, a winding dirt path, a white barn glowing with fairy lights that made the night feel softer. I stood outside the guest cottage they'd reserved for me, my bag in one hand, a printed itinerary in the other. Check-in, rehearsal dinner, ceremony, farewell brunch. Simple, organized, so very Haley. But standing there, I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That evening, there was a knock at my door. I braced myself. Would it be a hug, a fight, a flood of tears? But it was just Haley in jeans and a sweatshirt, clutching a mug of chamomile tea like it was her anchor. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small but steady. I nodded, and we sat in silence for 5 long minutes, just breathing the same air, the weight of years between us. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. I didn't know how to write what I needed to say, so I thought I'd say it here. "Face? To face." I stayed quiet, letting her find her words. "You didn't deserve what happened, Dira. None of it." And I hate that it took me so long to say that. I didn't interrupt. I just listened as she poured it out. Dad was wrong, and I was wrong for not standing up to him, for not defending you. You were always the strongest of us, and I should have followed you out that door. My throat tightened, memories of that day flashing like lightning. "You were a kid," I said softly. "You followed safety." She reached for my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "Maybe, but I'm an adult now, and I choose differently." That night, we talked for hours about our childhood, about Mom's silence, about the chasm between us that was finally starting to close. There were no tidy fixes, no perfect bows, just raw, messy truth. And that was enough. The next day, I helped Haley steam her wedding dress, adjusting straps, tying laces. Our hands moving together like they did when we were kids, braiding each other's hair, hair. When she walked down the aisle, glowing under the Virginia sun, I didn't see the sister who stayed behind. I saw the woman who'd found her voice, who'd chosen to reach out despite the risk. I sat in the front row, my heart full and aching, watching her promise forever to someone who looked at her like she was the stars. For a moment, I felt like I belonged not as a guest, but as family. Then Dad approached me after the ceremony. In a gray suit with a smile so rehearsed it could have been scripted. "Amber," he said, using my old nickname, like he hadn't shattered me with one text, hadn't erased me from his life. I met his eyes, steady, unflinching, and said nothing. He tried again, his voice smooth as ever. "You look well." I nodded. "I am?" Then I turned and walked away, not out of anger, but because some doors are meant to stay closed, locked tight to protect the peace you fought for. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved, not because you wanted to, but because you had to choose yourself? That night, under a sky full of stars, Haley raised her glass for a toast. "To beginnings," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To forgiveness. To the people we almost lost but found again." I raised my glass, the clink echoing in my chest, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing on the outside looking in. I felt like family. Not the one I'd lost, but the one I was building, piece by fragile piece. As the music played and the fairy lights danced, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was what healing looked like. If you've ever stood at the edge of forgiveness, unsure if you're ready to take that step, or if you found a way to rebuild with someone who hurt you, drop a comment below. Share your story. What did it feel like to choose connection over closure, or to walk away for your own peace? Like this video if it stirred something in you. Subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge Stories and hit that notification bell, because here we don't just tell the stories they tried to silence. We live them, we grow from them, and we hold space for yours too. This is my story, but it's yours too. And what's coming next is a journey of rebuilding one truth at a time. See you in the next one. 3 weeks after Haley's wedding, I slipped back to base in North Carolina. No fanfare, no fuss, just the quiet hum of routine pulling me back in. Life settled into a familiar rhythm, early mornings laced with dew and discipline. Training drills that left my muscles aching. Weekend phone calls with Haley that stretched longer each time. We weren't best friends again, not yet, but the walls between us were crumbling. The silence is softer, like we were learning to trust the ground beneath us. Have you ever rebuilt a bond that felt broken beyond repair? One small step at a time, wondering if it could ever feel whole again. Then one afternoon, a letter landed in my barracks mailbox. No return address, just like before, but this time the handwriting wasn't Haley's. It was Dad's sharp and precise, the kind that used to sign my report cards and, later, my exile. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Single page, folded with care. "Amber," it began. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I've been diagnosed stage 4. The words hit like a punch, blurring the rest of the letter. I couldn't read past that line, couldn't let it sink in. For days, I ignored it, shoved it into a drawer, told myself it wasn't my problem. He'd made his choices, hadn't he? Why was this mine to carry now? But guilt is a sneaky beast, creeping into the quiet moments right before sleep, in the pause, between conversations, whispering questions I didn't want to answer. Have you ever tried to outrun guilt, only to find it waiting for you in the stillness? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Haley. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice tighter than I meant. "Yes," she whispered, hesitant. "I wasn't sure when to tell you or if you'd even want to know." I didn't answer. Not then, just let the silence stretch between us. The next morning, I requested a weekend pass, booked a last-minute flight. And before I could talk myself out of it, I was standing outside his hospital room in Camden. He looked diminished, smaller, older, like someone had siphoned the fire that used to burn so fierce in him. His eyes flicked up when I walked in, shock melting into something like hope. "Amber," he said, his voice thin. I didn't hug him, didn't sit. I just stood there, arms crossed, and asked, "Why now?" He sighed, a long, weary breath that seemed to carry years of weight. "Because pain makes cowards honest," he said, "and I'm out of time to pretend." We talked for an hour about everything. About nothing. The lies, the company, the years he spent building a legacy that crumbled under its own greed. He didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. Not that day. Maybe not ever. But I listened, and that was more than I thought I'd ever give him again. Have you ever sat with someone who hurt you? Not to heal them, but to hear them, to see if their truth could loosen the knot in your chest? When I stood to leave, he spoke again, his voice softer. "You're stronger than I ever was, Amber, and I see that now." I paused at the door, turned just enough to meet his eyes. "You always could have said that before." I said, my voice steady, but sharp. Then I walked away, out into the crisp Maine air. The sky so clear it felt like it could cut through the fog in my heart. I didn't cry, but I breathed easier. Like I'd set down a load I'd been carrying too long. That night, back on my porch in North Carolina, I called Haley. The stars above me, bright and unjudging. "He's still him," I told her, "but maybe he's trying." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Trying counts for something." Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but for the first time in years, I felt like the story wasn't finished, just turning a page I could write myself without his shadow looming over it. This journey, mine and maybe yours too, isn't about tying up loose ends or finding perfect endings. It's about choosing what to carry and what to leave behind. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a moment when you faced someone who hurt you, or when you realized you were ready to turn the page. Some stories don't end. They evolve, shifting like seasons, never quite settling into a neat bow. I used to think closure was a finish line, a moment where the pain just vanishes and the world makes sense. But life, it's messier than that. Sometimes closure isn't a grand epiphany. It's choosing to live, to keep going, even when the ache lingers like an old friend. I didn't fully return to my family, not the way they wanted, but I stopped carrying their weight on my shoulders. I let it go, piece by piece, and found something lighter in its place. Myself, I started building new traditions, small but mine. Breakfast with friends who felt like family, quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and sunlight spilling across my porch, letters I wrote but never sent, pouring out thoughts I needed to release. And every December I lit a candle, not in mourning, but as a marker for the girl who packed her bags with shaking hands. For the woman who came back stronger, for the strength it took to walk away and the softness it took to let just a little bit of them back in. What rituals have you created to honor your own journey, the one that's carried you through the hard days? Haley and I kept talking every week, sometimes about the big stuff, dreams, regrets, the past, but sometimes just about what we were cooking for dinner, the kind of small talk that feels like a bridge. We weren't rebuilding what we'd lost. We were creating something new, something honest, something that could breathe. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. As for Dad, he passed that spring. I went to the funeral, standing in the back, silent, my hands steady in my pockets. I didn't speak, didn't cry, just stayed long enough to see the man he was through the eyes of people who never knew his shadows. The charming contractor, the pillar of Camden. I don't hate him, not anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I've chosen peace instead of. Peace that doesn't erase the past, but lets me live beyond it. People ask if I regret not going home that Christmas, not taking that final chance to mend things before it was too late. I don't. That choice, as painful as it was, led me to myself. It showed me I could stand alone, that I could build a life from truth, not expectations. And that was the greatest homecoming of all. Not to a house with a red door, but to the woman I'd fought to become. Thank you for walking this road with me, for listening to my story through every raw, messy moment. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family or carried wounds no one else can see, I hope this reminded you you're not alone. Your strength, your voice, your story, they matter. Drop a comment below and tell me about your own homecoming, your own evolution. Hit like if this stirred something in you. Subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge Stories and turn on that notification bell, because here we don't just tell the stories they tried to bury, we celebrate the ones that rise. And there are so many more hearts waiting to hear them. This chapter's closed, but the story, it's still evolving, and I can't wait to share the next one with you. See you soon!